Super Mario's Wacky Worlds was pitched as a sequel to the hugely successful Super Mario World. The planned sequel was taken on by the development studio Nova Logic, based out of Malibu, California. They originally began business by developing PC ports of arcade games from Japanese developer Taito. They ported Taito hits such as Neketsu Koha Kunio-kun or Renegades, Bubble Bobble, Arkanoid, and Rastan to various computer platforms. Japan's success in technology, home, and arcade gaming during the 80s and 90s meant that US-based companies were keen to get in and capitalize on the momentum that the industry was seeing. This is what likely led Nova Logic to get excited about working on the biggest IP in gaming, Mario. Nova Logic obtained the rights to use Nintendo's signature IP through a deal with Philips, who was working with Nintendo at the time on a potential Super NES CD that failed to come to fruition. It's reported that a Nintendo sales executive floated the idea of playing simple Nintendo games on the Philips CDI, which gave developers at Nova Logic an enticing opportunity. They worked frantically to put together a prototype and pitch for a Super Mario World recreation exclusively for the CDI. 2 programmers were put on the project that would become Wacky Worlds. John Brooks led the pitch. He was a self-taught programmer who would go on to have a robust career working with companies from EA, Activision, and Sega to Google. As the workload piled up, Brooks was soon joined by Silas Warner. Warner had already established himself as a successful programmer after developing the Apple II's Castle Wolfenstein during his time at Muse Software. According to Warner, the pair supposedly worked 24-hour days for over 2 weeks to get something ready for the pitch meeting with Nintendo. In order to save time, Warner said that the team took the character sprites from a video feed of Super Mario World running on the SNES. With little time to spare, part of a stage was ready to show off, and the 2 developers burned what they had onto a playable disc, just a mere 4 hours before the meeting with Nintendo. The demo was well received, and as Nova Logic hoped, Nintendo approved continued development. With Nintendo pleased, it was time for the developers at Nova Logic to get to work on making Wacky Worlds the next Nintendo x Philips crossover. The pitching duo, Brooks and Warner, continued on their project and began programming the first alpha build. This time, they were joined by other teams and their respective leads. Nina Stanley handled the game's visual design and graphics. She was responsible for the overall look and design of the characters, enemies, and stages, ensuring their similarity to the cutting-edge graphics of the original Super Mario World. After Wacky World's development concluded, Stanley ended up going on to work on multiple licensed IPs, such as Spider-Man, Tony Hawk, and a multitude of Disney titles. She even worked on Batman Begins and 2 Shrek games on the Game Boy Advance. The final cog of the team was Marty Folger, who led design on the project. Folger was a pioneer in CDI development, starting his own company, Tiger Media Inc., to create games for the system. He joined Nova Logic in 1991 as a game designer, and began his stint at the studio by working on the Sega Genesis game, Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Folger created an entire game specification document for the project. Essentially, he designed all the worlds and the mechanics of traveling between them. He also made the level maps in a computer program that featured a way to block out ground collisions. These stages were then printed off onto paper for the artists to render into their graphics workstation. They would then draw the stage art to match these blocked out tiles. Folger mentions that he worked very closely with lead artist Nina Stanley and spoke very highly of her work ethic and artistic style. Work continued on the game for almost a year of development, with the art and design near completion, while the code had some way to go, with just 30% complete. Pre-alpha discs somehow made their way out of Nova Logic's studio, and said prototype is playable on actual hardware, or in specialized versions of the MAME emulator that supports the Philips CDI. So, let's explore what secrets this prototype holds. The main menu in the prototype lists 6 worlds that contain 3 stages, with up to 6 areas for each stage. Given the continuity from area to area, it's safe to assume the areas would load one after another until you reach the end of the stage. The first world that we see in the prototype menu is for Ancient, which has a stage list of Greek, Egypt, and Aztec. These stages would have been Mario-fied depictions of real-world ancient sites. The Greek stages are some of the most finished in the prototype, with a good amount of continuity between the areas. It opens on a background of mountainous regions, with the Greek Parthenon in the foreground. Mario must reach the end of the stage, climbing collapsed columns to enter the mouth of the infamous wooden Trojan horse. Stage 2 then takes place within the horse itself. In some pretty cramped platforming conditions, Mario must dodge Roman Koopas and make his exit out of either one of the legs into the last Greek area, which happens to be the first water area in the game. It would see Mario swimming through underwater ruins of a Greek town, if they had finished programming the swimming mechanics, that is. The Egyptian stages use a similar premise, with Mario exploring the sands of ancient Egypt, only to come across a sphinx which resembles a Koopa. 3 warp pipes are presented to the player, with the subsequent stages becoming something of a dungeon crawler. Platforming through tombs with hieroglyphics on the walls, making your way through the maze. The final stage here is likely a temporary placeholder, as it's just an empty, sandy plain with no enemies. Overall, the iconic designs of these ancient ruins are visually striking, and would have made for some really memorable Mario stages. As for the Aztec stages, well, they don't function in the prototype. The Haunted World opens with Mario entering an oversized castle with what appears to be equipment for disturbing experimentations. A board with straps relative to human limbs, vials of green liquid, and mysterious machinery makes for one of the more terrifying implications in the series. The second area in this stage is a bit more tame, with a typical haunted castle environment. Portraits of olden-day Koopas are hung on the walls, and vampire Koopa enemies are left wandering the old halls. The next playable stage is on a ship. It's a large wooden pirate vessel that has an eerie sunset backdrop of the open ocean. The first 2 areas stretch the length of the ship, as they include the main deck, with the end of the stage appearing above a decorative Koopa figurehead at the bow of the boat. There is a third stage, which has Mario enter the hull of the ship. There are cobwebs and holes throughout, implying that this ghost ship is actually a ghost ship wreck. The Jungle World opens with a cave stage. The opening area has walrus enemies, and Koopas dressed for the Arctic. The second area has no such enemies, and utilizes falling as a game mechanic. Its spooky background, filled with masks, makes it a suitable contender for a haunted stage. As the player reaches the floor, an Easter Island-like head would have warped Mario to the third and final area, which is basically just the exit, with the finishing line appearing outside the cave. The swamp stages bring the return of underwater mechanics. There are areas here, with the first being the most like a typical Mario stage. It has platforming and multiple warp pipes, which lead to various areas that can be accessed through the 1 to 6 area selection in the menu. The end of the stage is actually in Area 2, and the rest just contains multiple warp pipes, likely intended to be a choice puzzle. Like the Aztec, the village stages again have no data, but with 6 areas, it may have been similar in design to the swamp stage. The Arctic world actually has data for each of the stages. Iceberg has a lengthy first area, with great graphical features. The reflections of the water look fantastic, as well as the blue icy hues against the multicolored aurora-like skies. Mario must traverse across icy platforms, dodging Arctic Inuit Koopas and oddly out-of-place Greek Koopas to reach the end in the second area. The Igloo stage has just one area, which is a large platforming maze, which takes place inside a large igloo. The area has 2 exits from this igloo maze, the Finishing M and a warp pipe. Ice Mountain is the final stage for the Arctic world. It has Mario climbing across a treacherous snowy path on the side of a mountain, concluding with a platforming segment down piles of snow to the finish line. The second stage, Geometropolis, is actually a carbon copy of another stage, Pipeworks, and is incredibly glitchy. Pipeworks, of course, being part of the final world Tubular. Incidentally, Pipeworks is the only stage with data in the Tubular world. It has an array of pipes for the background, platforming pipes that Mario can run along, as well as decorative water fountains. A perfect place for a plumber. The other stages in the Tubular world are labeled Sewer and Chemistry Lab, but we'll have to imagine what those stages might have been like, as that's the end of the accessible stages from the prototype. Exact dates are hard to come by, but the game was cancelled in 1993 after the development team had worked on the game for almost a year. In a quote from Silas Warner, he said that although Nintendo praised them for their efforts, they did eventually end up killing the idea. Warner attributes their move to the failing sales of the CDI as a system. Marty Folger also commented on the management decisions made around Wacky Worlds. It appeared that the intent was to produce the title with the smallest expenditure of resources as possible at that time, and Nova Logic used Super Mario's Wacky Worlds as a cash cow to fund Comanche and other internal titles that they intended to publish themselves at a greater profit than development for hire titles. Folger defended Nova Logic by suggesting that this was common practice at the time, as studios wanted to make the most out of opportunities that the new Philips system brought. Do you think Super Mario's Wacky Worlds would have been good? Some of the other Nintendo properties that made it to the CDI suggest not. But that does not detract from the passion, excitement, or talent that these developers had while creating this Mario game. It evidently took a lot of hard work to get something that was even remotely similar to the original Super Mario World up and running on the CDI. On this, Folger mentioned that the CDI just isn't designed to produce sprite-based games, and praised John Brooks' technical innovations in making it happen. The team had a lot of respect for the source material, and revered Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto, with Brooks saying the following. The team had great admiration for the series, and wanted to create something that would feel natural to players of Miyamoto's masterpieces. He and his team wanted to bring diverse stage themes to their Mario game, and make a real stamp on the Mario IP. And while the game was never finished, it does make for a remarkable piece of Mario gaming history. Subscribe and like the video if you want to see more videos on Mario, Sonic, and Spider-Man. Check out our videos on Mario Giga League finds and another Lost Mario game. Thanks for watching. This has been a GameFAQs special.